Oasis Audio presents The World and the Person by Romano Guardini, read for you by Bob Souer. Introduction. The Gentleman from Verona by Robert Royle. Romano Guardini was born in 1885 in Verona in northern Italy, but his family moved to the German city of Mainz, where his father served as the Italian consul while he was still very young. Except for regular trips back to his birthplace, he lived in Germany during his formative years and wrote in German. For many thinkers, this history might be a mere biographical detail. In Guardini's case, however, it has considerable significance. He was a beloved figure in his day among his students and had an enormous influence on the Catholic Church and European culture in the 20th century and beyond. He inspired later thinkers as diverse as Hans Urs von Balthasar, who wrote an interesting book about him, Joseph Pieper, Luigi Giussani, Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, and Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis. His influence probably owes something to the dual heritage that shows in all his work, which combines the academic rigor of the heyday of German intellectual life with the gentler human qualities of Italian culture. The present collection is a highly valuable retrieval of texts that supplement Guardini's greatest and best-known books, such as The End of the Modern World, The Spirit of the Liturgy, and The Lord, which have remained in print and have influenced generations. He makes a point of calling the works in this collection reflections, not systematic treatments, but in truth they reflect the author's deep and internally consistent theological, philosophical, and, unusual among religious writers, literary culture. His books on Dante and Rilke, along with his frequent references to Augustine, Pascal, Dostoevsky, Heidegger, and even Nietzsche, present an eclectic but deep and coherent vision of the Church and the world. Varying approaches to fundamental questions, of course, have their advantages and disadvantages. But as these texts make abundantly clear, Guardini had the kind of mind, the living virtue, as he puts it in his book on the virtues, included here, that can move flexibly but faithfully through whatever questions it encounters. This is why these books are less like academic treatises and more like living dialogues with a wise and experienced and learned friend. In recent years, there have been efforts to enlist Guardini into present-day conservative or liberal camps. It is misguided, however, to try to place him on some crude ideological spectrum, because he was a subtle and supple thinker, not a simplistic partisan. Guardini warned about the dangers of a soulless world of science and technology, for example, but welcomed advances in knowledge if they could be seen within a deep theological context. His vocal opposition to the Nazis led to his retirement from university teaching at only 53, but he also had grave doubts about the highly secularized political foundations of the democratic nations. He was one of the early advocates of liturgical reform and greater lay participation in liturgy, but he died just 3 years after the close of Vatican II and before the bitter liturgy wars and other post-conciliar controversies began. It is quite enough to appreciate his radical rootedness in the biblical realism that has always marked the Catholic Church, and to recognize the many insights and questions that he brings to bear on almost all modern and postmodern developments without trying to turn him into a protagonist in current controversies. In this brief introduction, it is impossible to do justice to all this intellectual wealth, but it may be helpful to highlight some of the main lines of Guardini's work. Several of the characteristics of Guardini the writer and thinker appear most clearly in his late book, The Virtues on Forms of Moral Life, 1963. After a few years of studying science and then economics, Guardini felt called to the priesthood and turned to theology in the early decades of the 20th century. Thomism, with its obvious roots in Aristotle, was undergoing a rich revival led by Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange, Jacques Maritain, Etienne Gilson, and many others. Guardini, however, chose to study the thought of Saint Bonaventure, who drew more from the Platonic Augustinian side of Catholicism. While he was also part of the scholastic flowering of the 13th century, Bonaventure was a Franciscan, and his works lend themselves more easily to modern currents of personalism and communitarianism. The Thomists are known as rigorous philosophers and theologians, but the Franciscan tradition, at least
Sample complete. Ready to continue?